Last week, Turkiye's Treasury and Finance Minister Nureddin Nebati met with Saudi Trade Minister Majid bin Abdullah Al Qasabi in Istanbul. The meeting was the latest in a series of high-profile visits that is restoring ties between Ankara and Riyadh following years of tensions and open hostility. One of the major points discussed was a $5 billion deposit that Saudi Arabia is planning to make into Turkiye's central bank. A Saudi official says the deal is in its final phase of discussions. The deposit would add to the $28 billion Turkiye's central bank already holds in currency swaps with several countries. And once approved, the deal would be the latest move by both countries to shore up economic ties following a year of high-level visits. Ankara and Riyadh were at odds over a number of issues over the past few years, including the blockade of Qatar and the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi back in 2018. Now, to further discuss Saudi Arabia's investments in Turkey, joining me now from London is Manas Chawla. He is the CEO of London Politica, an advisory firm specializing on political risks. And from Ankara, Betül Doğan Akkaş. She is a Gulf Studies researcher at Qatar University. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Betül, how would that $5 billion deal help both countries to shore up their economies, and what impact would we see?
Thank you. We can start with the Turkey's aspect for having that injection in the central bank. So first of all, it's good for economic stability, as we may all guess. At the same time, because it's an economic deal that might come not only with economic stability, but with further investment from Saudi Arabia. Turkey is in a really good position having that investment, having that deal. But when it comes to Saudi Arabia, the impacts are completely from a different angle. For Saudi Arabia, the diversification of economic and financial tools are key for the National Vision 2013. So having a deal or any economic deal with Turkey in terms of their currency reserve and diversification of the currency reserve is critical. So the first angle is diversification of their economic tools. And second angle is because now they are cooperating more with Turkey in political areas. Having a stable economic situation in Turkey might affect them indirectly in the regional affairs. And the last aspect is the importance of Saudi investments and currency reserve worldwide. So once they have more Saudi riyals in other central banks, there will be more economic prestige in terms of their currency and in terms of their economic portfolio.
Yes. So Manas, why is Saudi Arabia depositing this amount of money? I mean, what's the timing behind it? Is it also a part of this 2030 vision, as Betül mentioned?
Sure. This is all part of, a broader easing of Saudi-Turkish tensions. Saudi Arabia began easing an unofficial embargo on Turkish exports that it established following the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And it knows that if it does this as an act of good faith, it stands a lot to gain from closer trading ties in the future, possibly also political cooperation in the area. But as you say, the timing of this is really important. It's a big factor. It plays into the broader 2030 vision, but also in a sort of shorter time frame. We all know that Turkey has elections coming up next year. So the Saudi deposit deal could really help the president shore up support ahead of the elections. He's led the country for almost 20 years, but these elections are likely to be some of the closest we've seen yet. And support for him and his political alliance has fractured a bit high inflation and cost of living crisis, and the deposit from the Saudis and the central bank could certainly help tremendously with that.
So, Betül, none of this could be possible if Turkey and Saudi Arabia hadn't implemented the rapid normalization of ties last year. How important was it to get the politics first before economic ties could be restored?
First, when this is started, we actually understood the importance of practical steps in the diplomatic reconciliation, because once the parties started with the economic reconciliation, but they also said they are negotiating in the political angles. So what we see now, we see kind of a coexistence of political and economic targets, but more in a practical way, in a functional mechanism, let's say, in a diplomatic means. So if there is no political negotiation, if there is no reconciliation, for instance, with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, or in the future with Syria, we might see less economic targets among the countries, as the political negotiations are always somehow in the Middle East, dominating the economic angles. So definitely the political objectives were, of course, set, at least in a negotiation level, before going into a fully compromised angle. Then they start having further economic cooperation.
So Manas, along with the deposit, the Saudis are expected to boost investments across Turkey. What areas can we expect to see that investment?
Sure. I mean, the Turkish real estate sector is considered one of the most popular Turkish commercial sectors to attract Saudi investors, and the infrastructure sector of the kingdom is of great importance to Turkish companies. Lots of Saudi investors are also doing business in Turkey, increasingly in areas like production and agriculture. And Turkish companies are also going to contribute, of course, as we know, to the sort of the planned NEOM industrial city, to the Jeddah Red Sea project. So I think these infrastructure partnerships have a lot of potential to grow in the future, particularly as part of the Vision 2030, but also playing into Turkey's economic imperatives.
So besides real estate, Betül, construction, finance, and energy, what other areas could foreign investors be looking to?
Especially for Saudi investors and the Saudi state itself, in terms of its private companies and in terms of its state investment. I see the defense industry is most prominent now at the moment, because Turkey had battle-tested Bayraktar drones, and not only this ones, but other military industry equipments already sold to many countries in the Middle East and in other parts of the world. So I see a defense industry mechanism will be working more for the both parties. We have also news from the both sides. There might be cooperation over a factory settlement in Saudi Arabia to produce Turkish equipments by jointly Saudi and Turkish investors. So I believe we will see more in defense industry, apart all these sectors you mentioned.
So Manas, would you agree? I mean, what does competitive advantage Turkey offer in this regard?
No, I agree entirely. I think Turkey specializes on that defense front, which is increasingly important in sort of a fractious geopolitical situation. And the closer ties could enable Turkey to contribute to Saudi Arabia's effort to creating its own drone revolution. Again, that plays into Vision 2030, but it also puts emphasis on technology for economic growth and for diversification. Recently, for instance, we saw that Saudi manufacturers have started co-producing Turkish-made medium-altitude drones. And I think that reflects the potential for tighter economic and defense cooperation.
In 2016, Betül, trade volume between the two countries reached the benchmark of about $6 billion, which saw a dramatic decline in the following years. So what should be done to reach that level again? And could the trade volume reach $25 billion in the next 10 years, as agreed by the two countries?
I mean, if they really work hard on this objective, of course they can reach that level, but the priority here is going beyond short-term targets. So if they move more on to midterm or long-term targets, not only in terms of economic cooperation, but for their political alliances, then of course the level of investment and trade volume will be increased. Because at the moment, what we see in the Middle East, the countries are trying to cooperate somehow amid the global inflation rates or war in Ukraine, etc. But because of political tensions, those objectives are easily left behind and moving a stage of tension and strain. So what we need to see in terms of Turkish and Saudi relations, if they set long-term alliances with long-term objectives, then they might need also go beyond the personal personalities of the leaders or their conflicts of interest in other areas. If they focus more on the parts that they can work rather than the conflicts they have in the region or in global, then we might see a higher trade volume between the countries.
Manas, what do you think? What other external factors have pushed Saudi Arabia to invest in technology, renewables, construction, and etc.? I mean, are the surges in the global energy prices adding to the urgency to generate more sources?
I think if you look at the sort of investments that Saudi Arabia is making, I mean, they're making them in a much broader vision. They're investments that take years to manifest, and the surge in energy prices is a relatively short-term movement. We've also seen that the sort of very dismal projections that we had for Europe and energy prices just a few months ago aren't actually manifesting. Climatically, we're seeing it's going to be relatively a much warmer winter. That's going to reduce the strain on gas and on energy prices. But more than that, we've seen the Europeans have been able to stockpile their energy reserves beyond any analyst expectations. And I think that's certainly contributing to reducing sort of the cost of living crisis. So in a way, I'm sure energy prices play somewhat of a role, particularly in areas that have to do with maritime shipping, with boosting investment in R&D and renewables. But I do think the Saudis' vision here is much more long term than really being concentrated to this year or the next few months.
So, Richard, how does the future of Saudi-Turkish relations look? Have they walked past their differences, especially in politics?
Well, it's a difficult question, but what I can say, because now we have Mohammed bin Salman as the crown prince, and he will be ruling the country if nothing happens, any other condition for maybe for 4 decades, 5 decades. So basically, the future of Turkish-Saudi relations, first of all, depends on the leader of Saudi Arabia. Then, in terms of objectives and regional conflicts, I believe now we have more positive changes when it comes to their bilateral relationships rather than negative ones, because what we see, Turkey is more in with the angle of status quo in the region now, reconciliating with Sisi, and they said there will be more potential reconciliations with the other leaders. They were opposing the change in the Middle East, like Assad. So I believe, since the angle of Middle East politics is more like keeping the leaders as they are to have a stable political situation rather than further changes, I believe Turkish-Saudi relations will be oriented in this angle. But at the same time, as Manas mentioned before, the key of the relations is also economic gains. So both parties need practical and functional economic cooperations, not only for their global economic gains, but also for their domestic stability. At the end of the day, these are two countries, they are leading regional politics. So I guess this will be a win-win position if they focus more on long-term political and economic gains. So I am more optimistic, yeah.
Okay, Betül and Manas, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.
Thank you.